Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be involved with Congressman Pittenger since this started in our 24th engagement. I feel honored to assist Congressman Pittenger on the board, and since he started this, and I'm very, very thankful for Mr. Campos and our friendship over the years, and for everything that you've done for me personally and as a group. The last time we met, I spoke about artificial intelligence and quantum computing. So this was a little bit easier. Now we're talking about illicit activity, which is pretty broad. It's very broad. Everything that was discussed today actually is illicit. So I was talking to some experts at criminality, Bob Bauer and another guy that works for me, Bob Kofod, and we were discussing illicit. There's so many things that are illicit. But I'm going to stick with financial crimes and the ones that we've been discussing at this forum. One of the things I forgot for years, and I remembered learning this, that the word money laundering was actually invented by Al Capone, a gangster in Chicago in the United States, because in order to launder or hide his money, he bought a lot of laundromats in Chicago, and that was the term money laundering. So if you go home not learning anything else, perhaps that's something new that you didn't know prior. Now, the struggle that we have with illicit activity and money laundering, I'm going to call it, the UN estimates that money laundering is about 2 to 5% of the GDP of the world, which places it around $2 million plus, $2 million a year plus. That would make it one of the world's largest businesses, actually the number 3 business in the world. So money laundering is one of the largest businesses in the entire world. So we have a problem where how do we take our young people and how do we educate our young people to go do right, to join law enforcement, like with my colleague here from law enforcement or the FIU? How do we convince our younger people to fight this versus to join it? So I did a lot of counterterrorism in my lifetime, and that's how I moved into this business. But it was like, one of the things we were always concerned about is the next generation. How do you lure over, how do you educate the next generation? And we're struggling with that because criminality is very profitable and money laundering is very profitable. In some situations, you're up to 30%. So if you look at some large drug dealers, the average is about 10 to 15%. But if you get into large criminal organizations and large drug dealing organizations, up to 40, 50, 60%. So the majority of their money is actually spent laundering the money and cleaning the money versus producing the money, which is very interesting. So the way we combat this, in general, is to go after financial institutions and find them, and find the shareholders. And I went through and I was thinking about some of the famous fines in the United States. And there was one in 2008 at Wachovia Bank. They found the Mexican drug cartel was moving 5.7 tons of cocaine and moving $1 trillion in US dollars. They were fined $160 million. That was the largest fine at that point in time. But the really cool thing, considering they moved over 5 trillion, over 5 billion, 5.7 tons of cocaine. That's one day, one catch. They were fined $160 million. But the coolest thing was they promised to improve their AML program. They promised to do a better program. I thought that was fantastic. Another famous fine was Standard Charter in 2012. They moved $265 billion through their organization. A lot of it was Iranian money and other sanctions countries. Again, $265 billion that we know of. Well, they were fined $670 million. But the cool thing is, they also promised to get better. Then HSBC, they moved, again, trillions and trillions of dollars. They were fined an astronomical $1.9 billion fine, which was less than 10 days' profit for HSBC. The cool thing is they promised to do a better job. In all of those situations, nobody went to jail. Nobody was arrested. We have a problem with this as a community. Now, the reason I'm going to stick more on the United States when I come to SAR filing, not to show any prejudice, so I'm going to focus on that being an American, but the numbers I'm going to talk about across the board are global. We're just filing more and more SARs and STRs on people, but we're filing them on the wrong people, and that's what I want to discuss a little bit before I turn it over to my colleagues. I know people, and I'm sure everybody in this room knows people that are convicted of some sort of drug-related crimes, and I know a fellow he's facing 45 years in prison for moving drugs, but we have bankers that pay a fine of shareholder money, and they don't spend one day in crime. They don't even have the possibility of going to crime, but they promise to do a better job. So we need to do a better job as a society. So if you're involved in illicit activity and money laundering of this magnitude of trillions of dollars, somebody should go to jail. And it's not going to change until people are arrested and convicted and sentenced to jail. And we're not doing that. So we kind of have to look at this from a prejudicial standpoint. Why do we send all of these poor people to jail and these rich executives have shareholders pay the fine? This is a question I have to ask myself on a regular basis. And that's what this forum is for. You have a lot of elected officials in here. This was put together for parliamentarians. I'm asking you all of these questions. What are we going to do about it between now and the next one? So some numbers from the United States as far as SAR filings, we call them suspicious activity reports in the United States, STRs elsewhere. From 2014, about when we started this, to 2021, money service businesses went from filing 700,000 SARs to 1.1 million. Bank accounts, bank deposits went from 830,000 SAR filings to 1.4 million. Securities and futures exchanges, they went from 22,000 to 59,000, which is a very low number if you think about it. I do remember going to a meeting, and I'll mention their name because they're not in business anymore. I had a meeting with executives in the AML department at Lehman Brothers, and they were very, very proud. The prior year, they filed one SAR. One. I'm not surprised they're out of business. They didn't have a very good risk management methodology there. But they filed one SAR, and they were actually proud of this when they were saying, we don't need you, we don't need your services, we don't have a problem. I mean, come on, guys, it's kind of funny, and women. But the reason I mentioned about the SARs in the United States, this is a trend for STRs around the world, so basically double. So we filed double the amount of SARs and double the amount of STRs globally. Now, I think there's a problem with that, because a lot of the SARs are filed on transactions that are $1,000 or less. They're filed on identity theft, where you're actually filing the suspicious activity report on the victim of the crime, because people feel like the regulators are pushing them to do that. So what we're doing is clogging up the system. We're clogging up law enforcement. We're clogging up intelligence with useless information. So what we need to do is speak with our regulators and our partners in the FIU and around the world and sit down and say, what information do you really need? Because we could now produce better information with better technology. So we're still using old technology to produce SARs, but we have what's called regulatory risk versus money laundering risk. So people are now trying to not get fined or not get in trouble with a regulator, more so than actually finding bad actors, which is why we all got into this business in the first place. It was kind of like, so I deal a lot with regulatory risk. I don't find as many terrorists as I used to. I don't find as many drug dealers as I used to, because the system is now clouded with useless information. So we need to have a better SAR crisis. Somebody earlier today said, and I forget who it was, but I wrote it down. It was so important to me. Crimes and criminals are running, and law enforcement and regulation change is crawling. I thought that was a very, very important thing. Because when you're filing SARs and you have computer systems that basically look for transaction monitoring, we're still using technologies that are as dated and 15 years old, if not longer, where we have now artificial intelligence systems which I discussed at the last forum, and we have other advanced technologies that will actually help us pinpoint really unusual transactions versus what's considered unusual, somebody going into the bank and putting in $9,000 a couple of times. I mean, guys and women, we're moving trillions of dollars. We're worried about some foreigner in the United States that comes and puts in $9,000 3 times in a row. I mean, this is peanuts. So we really need to adjust our thinking processes and work with our partners and the governments and regulators and the banking community to come up with methodologies that actually help people find. And some of those have to do with transaction monitoring systems, which I've spoken about in the past and will be here. I don't want to get into the details of the technology of transaction monitoring, but we have methodologies now. And transaction monitoring is a rules-based methodology where you're looking for oddities and strange things, right? So what Sitespan at my firm, what we do is a lot of tuning of those scenarios so that they're looking for the right transactions with the right people and putting together oddities. But there's also new technologies that are being developed that go through the alerts that are generated, the money laundering alerts, and based on past behavior, you could predict future behavior, and you could start narrowing down. So instead of filing 1 million SARs, you're actually filing 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, but they're relevant. These are things that somebody should look at. These are things that you want to send to the FIU. These are things that you want the FBI to engage in. You want intelligence agents to engage in. What we're doing is having defensive SAR filing where people are just sending over the SAR saying, I don't want to be in trouble, so I'm going to send you over a lot of useless information and check the box. So all the elected officials need to partner with your regulators to come up with methodologies to allow the new technologies to be accepted. What I deal with a lot is the marketplace comes up to meet the need, new technologies are there, but the regulators, and I work in 26 different countries, the regulators in all 26 countries are apprehensive to find this technology and learn it and utilize it. So they're kind of pushing the financial community back to stay with old technology when there are new technologies available that would allow us to narrow down the STRs and the SAR filing so that it's relevant information. So I think this is something that we could talk about in detail. We could have very, very long conversations on it. I'm around for the next day or two. If somebody wants to talk about transaction monitoring and these new technologies, feel free. But I think the main thing that I want to put across is we need to have information, but it has to be of value. And we have to start looking at this multiple trillion-dollar problem in a different way. We can't treat it like every other small problem. This is the 3rd largest business in the world, and I don't want any of our children being lured into this. I want them to come and join us and fight it. Thank you for the time.